US President Trump has come out of many UN agencies. Trump or at present US is not showing the same enthusiasm which US was showing earlier for strengthening multilateralism. After Second World War, we realized we need a body in which few powers needs to hold more powers, and based on this particular realization, UN was created with an organ called Security Council. Whether it is about taking collective security action, whether it is about peacekeeping missions, right? India is one of the major contributors, and India is devoid of its say of sending peacekeepers. India demands reforms, and as P5 are not showing that willingness to reform, that's why the question, should India leave UN altogether? Hello everyone, the topic I am going to take in this video is that should India leave UN? So it's a contemporary topic. Discussions are going on regarding UN and on this aspect, that what role India wants to play at present in UN, and is it time for India to leave UN? US President Trump has come out of many UN agencies. Trump or at present US is not showing the same enthusiasm which US was showing earlier for strengthening multilateralism. So the question mark arises, should India also think on these lines of leaving UN? Now there is a scholar who said that despite India playing such an active role in UN, India is one of the major contributor in the peacekeeping forces. Since independence, India has always tried to fulfill the objectives and the guidelines of UN. In fact, India's policy of NAM reflect the principles and the values of UN. Despite India showing a lot of commitment towards UN and its objective, still India's role has not been recognized the way it should be. So is it time for India to deliberate and think on these lines that we should leave UN? And as I said, there's a scholar who said India should go for non-cooperation. So we need to start a non-cooperation movement with UN so that UN should realize the importance of India. Okay, the major ground on which this debate is gaining strength is regarding India's demand to reform UN. And as the P5 countries who holds the veto power, who are not willing to go for reform, the question mark or the deliberation on this aspect, as they are not ready to reform, should we go for non-cooperation, and then they will realize the importance of India. So let's deliberate on this aspect. What should be the way forward for us, or what kind of policy we should pursue regarding UN? Now, UN as an institution was created after the end of Second World War, and the negotiations and discussions regarding the creation of such a international body of global governance took place in Atlantic Charter. Okay, now if you are if you have read a bit of world history, after the end of First World War, an organization was created, that is League of Nations, but League failed to prevent Second World War, and after Second World War, we realized we need a body in which few powers needs to hold more powers, and based on this particular realization, UN was created with an organ called Security Council, and in Security Council of UN there are at present 15 members, out of which 5 are permanent and 10 are non-permanent, and these 5 permanent members hold veto power. So the whole debate regarding the reforms in UN revolves around this particular aspect of veto power, which is the final power and gives substantive say to the major players of the world politics, and this gives substantive say to 5 major countries of the world who hold veto power, and these are US, China, Britain, France and Russia. So these are the 5 veto holding member countries, right? And they hold a major say. Now, whether it is about taking collective security action, whether it is about peacekeeping missions, right? India is one of the major contributor, and India is devoid of its say of sending peacekeepers. And according to India, when UN was deliberated, it was deliberated around 8 decades back. Okay, and the structure of the world politics has changed since then. At that time, economy was used as a criteria to give the permanent membership, that the five major economies of the world are being given permanent membership. According to India, now Britain and France no longer holds the similar economic status. Even if we go by that principle, other countries deserve more than these European states. Okay, so this is the reason why India is one of the most vocal supporter of reforms in UN. So, as said by the Prime Minister Modi recently, it's high time for UN to reform. If UN wants to keep itself relevant, the need is reform. Okay. Now there is a principle of collective security in UN, as per which UNSC can take a military action if any other state undermines the sovereignty and integrity of other. And who can take this military action, who can decide for this military action is UNSC. And in UNSC, technically P5 countries hold veto power. So first thing, no military action can be taken against the P5 under collective security. This is one of the biggest flaw and the drawback of UN. Okay, so that's why India demands reforms, and as P5 are not showing that willingness to reform, that's why the question, should India leave UN altogether? Now, the question is, will it serve our interest more if we come out of UN, or being a part of UN and keep demanding for reforms will be a more pragmatic step which we should stick with? So, as in the beginning I said, there are scholars who are saying we should go for non-cooperation movement. We should initiate a non-cooperation. By initiating a non-cooperation movement, world or the UN member countries will realize the importance of India. Okay. So there are grounds on which UN is being criticized. Like UN has failed to prevent wars, UN has failed to prevent proliferation. Other these criticisms are the one aspect. Okay, but the major ground on which India claims reform is that there is a need to go for the expansion of UNSC to make UN a more inclusive and democratic body. You cannot keep the biggest democracy of the world outside the ambit of the permanent membership. This is the major ground on which India demand reform, that being the biggest democracy, you cannot keep us away from the ambit of permanent membership. Also, the whole Africa is devoid of permanent representation. So according to India, there's a need to bring more credible member states in UNSC to make UN a more credible institution. So the question is, should, if they are not ready to accommodate Indian demands, should we come out of this? Now, coming out of UN will not going to be a rational or a pragmatic step. First, India will going to lose a diplomatic platform from where we can raise important issues. So it will going to diminish our voice. Okay. So India will be isolated from the global platforms, and which for sure India does not want to do. So if India will not be there, so there are 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent members, and 7 times India has represented in UN as a non-permanent members which are elected for 2 years. So at least by being the part of the UN, India can raise the issues of the global south in the UN. So coming out of UN will not going to serve India's interest in any way. In fact, it will going to diminish our voice in world politics and world affairs. Being a party to UN, we can continue with our role and we can push for reforms from within UN. So technically, practically, I guess for India, it is much better to be within the UN and keep pushing for the reforms from within the system. India and India with other credible players has created a body called G4, and G4 member countries are seen as the most credible countries at present who should be given the permanent membership. The G4 countries are Japan, Germany, Brazil, India. So the G4 are demanding permanent membership in UNSC, and they are saying it's high time to go for reforms. Germany being the biggest economy of Europe, Japan being the second largest economy of the world, India third largest in terms of PPP and the biggest democracy in the world, and Brazil the biggest country in terms of geography and economy of South America. So they are demanding the permanent membership. But the thing is, there are other countries also who hold a similar aspiration. Then, if you bring Japan and India, there will be three from the Asian continent, and including Germany will increase the representation of Europe. What about Africa? And the whole of Africa is devoid of representation. So the need is to bring few African countries on board to make UNSC a genuinely inclusive democratic body. But the question is the commitment of the P5. Till the time P5 will not agree, no such amendment can take place in UN Charter. So the need is the consensus among P5, and there's a need to build pressure on P5 that if they're genuinely interested in making UN a body who can resolve the issues which are arising in present, then they need to bring more on board. And India leaving UN will not going to serve our purpose in any way. Okay, so considering this question which is being asked by many of you, that should we, sir, as US is contemplating, should we also think of coming out of UN? So the answer is no, we are not thinking and contemplating on coming out of UN. In fact, at present, India is one of the most vocal supporter of multilateralism. India wants to strengthen multilateralism. India wants to strengthen these international bodies and institutions. And India's stand is that if UN wants to keep itself relevant, and this question needs to be deliberated by P5, if they want UN to be relevant, it's high time for reform. Okay, so India wants reform. India does not want to be isolated, and we are not thinking of coming out of UN. So this is the present aspect and the present stand of India on UN. I hope this discussion would give you clarity that what this what this would have given you clarity about UN as a body, for which purpose it was created, and the major debate revolves around which aspect in UN. So keep tuned, we'll keep discussing more such topics in future also. Best wishes, take care.